I am Ryan McKnight.
I'm Cara Santa Maria.
I am Christopher Smith.
Hi, I'm Andrew Torres.
This is Naked Mormonism,
the serial Mormon history podcast. The Mormons had a lot of trouble with the legal system during Joseph Smith's time. This was a running motif through all of Joe's leadership of the religious sect. They were rarely on the right side of the law. Whether we focus on the Kirtland, Ohio, the far west Missouri, or Nauvoo, Illinois, the major headquarters of the church were constantly at battle with the legal system in one way or another. Missouri in 1838 was the most overtly lawless and anti-government period of the church. After the Mormons were removed from Missouri due to the war, their surrender, and Governor Boggs' extermination order, they decided to be lawless within the confines of the law in Illinois. One of the first items on Joe's to-do list upon his escape from jail in 1839 was to collect dozens of affidavits from various members and church leaders petitioning the federal government for redress. The Mormons wanted to be paid back for their mistreatment in Missouri. These initial petitions were taken by Joseph Smith, Hinchman Cindy Rigdon, Pistolback and Porter Rockwell, and Dr. Bob the Builder Robert D. Foster to the federal legislature. Joe met with them as well as with President Martin Van Buren, and their petitions were denied. Martin Van Buren claimed that if he did anything to help the Mormons out of their perilous situation, quote, he would come into contact with the whole state of Missouri, which was an accurate assessment. According to Joseph Smith, the President of the United States told him, quote, your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you, end quote. Well, Van Buren had to weigh in the balance his next election, right? I mean, Joe, angry with the outcome of their meeting, he returned to Commerce, Illinois, which was soon to become Nauvoo, and he proclaimed along his trip home that Van Buren was corrupt and he wouldn't help the Mormons achieve justice. He called Martin Van Buren a fop or a fool, and said he thought that Van Buren was without body or parts, as no one part seemed to be proportioned to another. And then he declared repeatedly, quote, we do not say the saints shall not vote for him, but we do say boldly that we do not intend that he shall have our votes, end quote. Martin Van Buren's treatment of the Mormons and the whole Mormon problem in Missouri, that didn't really have much of an effect on his campaign, although it certainly didn't help. But the nation was in turmoil following the Panic of 1837 and the following recession. Many voters were extremely upset with how Van Buren had carried out Jackson's Indian Removal Act and his general treatment of many native tribes. The Whigs took the seat of president with a grassroots movement in the 1840 election. The backcountry hero of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, sat as president after Martin Van Buren for an entire month before he died in office, which put his vice president, John Tyler, a member of the wealthy elite of Washington, into the seat of the presidency. This was one of the death knells of the Whig Party. Americans, Mormons included, they were looking for a fresh face in the 1844 presidential election. The main issues which divided the parties of the day were slavery and territorial expansion. There were many other issues, of course, that, comprised or unified or divided the Whigs and the Democrats, but these two issues, slavery and territorial expansions, were the hot-button issues of 1844. The Mormons all had their own political and social leanings, but more than anything, the Mormons would vote for anybody who would grant them the most leniency and privileges to their religious society. Religious liberty! That was the war cry of the Mormons. Accordingly, it was time for the Mormons to put up their favorite person as presidential candidate for 1844, even the prophet of the one true church, Joseph Smith. The history of the church includes Joe's journal entry for January 29th, 1844, which reads as follows, quote, Monday, 29th. The 12 apostles, together with my brother Hiram and John P. Green, met at the mayor's office, Joseph's office, to take into consideration the proper course for this people to pursue in relation to the coming presidential election. The candidates for the office of President of the United States at present before the people are Martin Van Buren and Henry Clay. It is morally impossible for this people, in justice to themselves, to vote for the re-election of President Van Buren, a man who criminally neglected his duties as chief magistrate, in the cold and unblushing manner which he did when appealed to for aid in the Missouri difficulties. That's, of course, denying the Mormons' petition for redress, for, actual physical remuneration for what, the property that they lost in the war. Joe continues. His heartless reply burns like a firebrand in the breast of every true friend of liberty. Your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you. As to Mr. Clay, his sentiments and cool contempt of the people's rights are manifested in his reply. You had better go to Oregon for redress, which would prohibit any true lover of our constitutional privileges from supporting him at the ballot box. It was therefore moved by Willard Richards, whiteout Willard Richards, and voted unanimously that we will have an independent electoral ticket and that Joseph Smith be a candidate for the next presidency, and that we use all honorable means in our power to secure his election. I said, if you attempt to accomplish this, you must send every man in the city who is able to speak in public throughout the land to electioneer and make stump speeches, advocate the Mormon religion, purity of election, and call upon the people to stand by the law and put down mobocracy. David Yearsley must go, Parley P. Pratt to New York, Erastus Snow to Vermont, and Sidney Rigdon to Pennsylvania. After the April conference, we will have general conferences all over the nation, and I will attend as many as convenient. Tell the people we have had Whig and Democratic presidents long enough. We want a president of the United States. If I ever get into the presidential chair, I will protect the people in their rights and liberties. I will not electioneer for myself. Hiram, Brigham, Parley, and Taylor must go. Clayton must go, or he will apostatize. The Whigs are striving for a king under the garb of democracy. There is oratory enough in the church to carry me into the presidential chair the first slide. Mr. Edward A. Beadle, wanting an election at Warsaw, Benjamin Winchester was appointed to go. Captain White of Quincy was at the mansion last night, and this morning drank a toast. May all your enemies be skinned and their skids made into drumheads for your friends to beat upon. May Nauvoo become the empire seat of government. End quote. That was it. The wheels were put into motion, but one doesn't just run for president and then magically get elected, right? Some business had to be attended to in order to make this nomination official. It continues, quote, I dictated to Brother Phelps, that's William Wines Phelps, the head of my pamphlet entitled Views on the Powers and Policy of the Government of the United States, end quote. Let's discuss this. We are getting into 1844 in our historical timeline, and things begin to accelerate very quickly this year, if we weren't already at a breakneck pace with this interesting history. Nauvoo was seen as the place from which the Mormon president could rule the nation, and Captain White saying, may Nauvoo become the empire seat of the government, that reveals the ideology behind this presidential nomination. Now, Joe had quite a few irons in this fire, right? Talos was nearing completion. The Mormon war machine was close to booting up and waging total destruction on any opposed to the Mormon theocracy. The simple fact remains that a person can't overthrow a nation without some powerful organizations underneath them to keep everything organized. Organized crime is more effective than one guy holding up a gas station with a gun, right? The Mormons needed a proper system of organization to govern America once Joe took the election or took the nation by military force. Of course, election to president, the peaceable option was preferred out of the two. The Council of 50 was organized barely a month after Joe announced his presidential candidacy. The Council of 50 will be our next special multi-part series because the Council of 50 is so crucial to understanding the remainder of Nauvoo history, and we're going to begin that multi-part series in 2 weeks. For today, however, let's discuss the inciting incident that created the Council of 50, Joe's bid for the country's presidency. We're going to read his campaign pamphlet from top to bottom today. Why read the whole thing? Well, if you ever want to know what his campaign platform was on specific issues, you have to read the whole thing, and listening to me read it is just as good as reading it for yourself, right? Plus, we get to discuss what everything means within the context of the 1840s and where Joe was trying to plant his political and ideological platform flags. Now, yes, there's going to be superfluous information in this podcast today, but y'all have probably come to expect that from me by now, right? Now, I'm going to try to make this show useful as reference material, even if my commentary on the sources is terrible as usual. But I find that it's better to be over rather than under-informed when we're talking about issues like this. Now, you'll find a link to his campaign pamphlet in the show notes. That's on josephsmithpapers.org. And then, of course, after we're done reading through this, stick around because you're going to hear a special segment with 2 guests that I'm very, very excited to have on the show. All right, let's get into it. General Smith's views of the powers and policy of the government of the United States. Now, this was written by William Wines Phelps, and John Taylor was the printer. He printed it out of the Times and Seasons printing press in Nauvoo, Illinois, 1844. So it begins. Born in a land of liberty and breathing an air uncorrupted with the sirocco of barbarous climes, I ever feel a double anxiety for the happiness of all men, both in time and in eternity. My cogitations, like Daniel's, have for a long time troubled me when I viewed the condition of men throughout the world, and more especially in this boasted realm where the Declaration of Independence holds these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But at the same time, some 2 or 3 millions of people are held as slaves for life because the spirit in them is covered with a darker skin than ours. Now, it has nothing to do with melanin. It's the spirit within them that makes their skin dark. Of course, that's Mormon theology coming through. But it wasn't just Mormon. It was the general understanding of the time. He continues, and hundreds of our own kindred for an infraction or supposed infraction of some overwise statute have to be incarcerated in dungeon glooms or suffer the more moral penitentiary gravitation of mercy in a nutshell, while the duellist, the debauchee, and the defaulter for millions and other criminals take the uppermost rooms at feasts, or, like the bird of passage, find a more congenial climb by flight. Okay, so what did he say there, right? So this is populism. This is rallying up the poor masses against the powerful criminal elite, right? We have people who are incarcerated in slavery. We have people who are spending their time in dungeon glooms, as he said, or they suffer the more moral penitentiary gravitation of mercy in a nutshell. I assume that means by death penalty, right? But then he says that the duelist, the debauchee, the defaulter of millions, other major criminals, these are the criminal elite, the white-collar criminals. Those are the ones who eat the fancy meals and they enjoy life in, the elite offices that they occupy. So this was populism. This is something that Andrew Jackson had curried in the late 1820s was, the everyman's president. That's what Joseph Smith was running on, even though he himself was a member of the elite at this time. Joseph Smith went from rags to riches. He continues, the wisdom which ought to characterize the freest, wisest, and most noble nation of the 19th century should, like the sun in its meridian splendor, warm every object beneath its rays. And the main efforts of her officers, who are nothing more or less than the servants of the people, ought to be directed to ameliorate the condition of all, black or white, bond or free. For the best of books says, God hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth. End quote. And of course, that only applies if you are an Israelite, according to the Bible, not if you're an Amalekite or a Midianite or a Canaanite, or you got to be God's promised people in order to enjoy all of the things that are, seen the same in Christ, black and white, bond and free, so on and so forth. Our common country presents to all men the same advantages. That's just not true. The same facilities. That's not true either. The same prospects, the same honors, and the same rewards. None of those things are true even today, much less in the 19th century. And without hypocrisy, the Constitution, when it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It meant what it said, without reference to color or condition ad infinitum. Yeah, but slavery was never outlawed in the Constitution until after the Civil War. So obviously, in idea, all men are created equal and enjoy all of the same facilities, the same advantages, the same honors, the same rewards without hypocrisy. But in practice, that's not how it turned out. That's just not how it turned out. The aspirations and expectations of a virtuous people environed with so wise, so liberal, so deep, so broad, and so high a charter of equal rights as appears in said Constitution ought to be treated by those to whom the administration of the laws are entrusted with as much sanctity as the prayers of the saints are treated in heaven. That love, confidence, and union like the sun, moon, and stars should bear witness. For ever singing as they shine, the hand that made us is divine. So what was said there is every person who is entrusted with administering the law, members of the government, they should treat the voters as the same way that the prayers of the saints are treated in heaven, that they are holy. You know, holy is probably the wrong word for it, but that's what he's implying. But I tend to agree with this, that the people who run the government should pay attention to the people who actually fill out their names on their respective ballots. It doesn't seem to be that way much. If it ever has been that way, it seems to be whoever writes the biggest check really has the ear of the politicians. But I still understand the sentiment that he's saying here, and it resonates. This is a populist ticket. This resonates with the everyday man. And I say everyday man because women couldn't vote here, right? Of course not. He continues. Unity is power, and when I reflect on the importance of it to the stability of all governments, I am astounded at the silly moves of persons and parties to foment discord in order to ride into power on the current of popular excitement, as like he is doing. That's exactly what he's doing. Nor am I less surprised at the stretches of power or restrictions of right, which too often appear as acts of legislators, to pave the way to some favorite political schemes as destitute of intrinsic merit as a wolf's heart is to the milk of human kindness. A Frenchman would say, Prosque tout a mieux richesse et pouvoir, which he's nice enough to translate. I know I murdered it. The translation apparently is almost all men like wealth and power, which sure, especially the powerful and wealthy people, they tend to like more wealth and power. So once again, this is Joe pitting the poor masses against the wealthy elite. This is all a populist dog whistle coming from Joseph Smith, who was honestly one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. He was mayor of his own city. He was a religious leader to over 10,000 people, and he was a commander-in-chief of his own militia. I think that is quite revealing that he is trying to, at the same time that he is decrying these populist candidates who bring people up in a current of popular excitement and foment discord among the people, he's doing the same exact thing that he's decrying. He continues, I must dwell on this subject longer than others. For nearly 100 years ago, that golden patriot Benjamin Franklin drew up a plan of union for the then colonies of Great Britain that now are such an independent nation, which among many wise provisions for obedient children under their father's more rugged hand had this. They have power to make laws, and lay and levy such general duties, imports, or taxes, as to them shall appear most equal and just, considering the ability and other circumstances of the inhabitants in the several colonies, and such as may be collected with the least inconvenience to the people, rather discouraging luxury than loading industry with unnecessary burdens. Great Britain surely lacked the laudable humanity and fostering clemency to grant such a plan of a just union, but the sentiment remains, like the land that honored its birth, as a pattern for wise men to study the convenience of the people more than the comfort of the cabinet. Now, he said it. I must dwell on this subject longer than others. This is what Joe was creating as his opening point in his platform, in his campaign pamphlet. This is a populist agenda. That's what he was creating. He was trying to get the blue-collar voters out there to him to say, hey, he's not a Whig or a Democrat. He's just a guy, and he's my guy. It worked so great for Jackson. It works great for certain candidates today. And one of the most noble fathers of our freedom and country's glory, great in war, great in peace, great in the estimation of the world, and great in the hearts of his countrymen, the illustrious George Washington, said in his first inaugural address to Congress, I behold the surest pledges that as, on one side, no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views or party animosities will misdirect the comprehensive and equal eye which ought to watch over this great assemblage of communities and interests, so, on another, that the foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality, and the preeminence of free government be exemplified by all the attributes which can win the affections of its citizens and command the respect of the world. What is he saying? He's just quoting George Washington, and Washington saying that, it's in the view of the people, right? We're not going to use government to sow discord among people. We're going to use government to represent the diversity of people with an equal eye, a comprehensive and equal eye, which will watch over this great assemblage and communities of interests. I get it. That's the high-minded ideal with which our Constitution and Bill of Rights was created in this country. Obviously, a document doesn't mean much if it is executed and interpreted in ways that render the document not in the view of what the original framers decided or envisioned, right? That's the thing, is these were seen as high-minded ideals of diversity and equality, that this would be the greatest and most free nation in the world. But then, wealth and power corrupts, absolutely. And those people who tend to write the bigger checks end up holding those offices that actually have the power to move and sway the country the ways that they see fit. And that is what Joseph Smith here is decrying. That's why he is citing George Washington. That's why he goes on to talk about James Adams and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. He cites all of these people and quotes from them extensively from their inaugural addresses. And, he's trying to illustrate that this is supposed to be a government for the people, by the people, and it is a government that is created for the protection of the people. He continues, "Verily, here shines the virtue and the wisdom of a statesman in such lucid rays, that had every succeeding Congress followed the rich instruction in all their deliberations and enactments for the benefits and convenience of the whole community and the communities of which it is composed, no sound of a rebellion in South Carolina, no rupture in Rhode Island, no mob in Missouri expelling her citizens by executive authority, corruption in the ballot boxes, a border warfare between Ohio and Michigan, hard times and distress, outbreak upon outbreak in the principal cities, murder, robbery, defalcation, scarcity of money, and 1,000 other difficulties would have torn asunder the bonds of the Union, destroyed the confidence of man, and left the great body of the people to mourn over misfortunes and poverty, brought on by corrupt legislation in an hour of proud vanity for self-aggrandizement." Yeah, he's just saying exactly what I said before. If the people who continue to be elected to government would have followed the original dictates of the framers of the Constitution, we wouldn't have the terrible country that we have today. That's what he's saying. The great Washington, soon after the foregoing faithful admonition of the common welfare of his nation, further advised Congress that among the many interesting objects which will engage your attention, that of providing for the common defense will merit particular regard. To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. And then he says, as the Italian would say, buono avviso, good advice. Yeah, tread lightly and carry a big stick, but, of course, never cease to care for the veterans. That's how we do things in this country. I get it. Personally, it doesn't matter where you land on this, but the idea of pacifism versus, military aggressivism, there are certain merits to both arguments and to both sides. And as the Congress initially intended, as Washington initially intended, when they were framing the Constitution, we should have a well-regulated militia that is able to provide for the common defense of the United States. I don't know how they would react to that being appropriated and used in foreign wars, in proxy wars. I don't think that matters because most of these guys have been dead for well over 200 years. So it really doesn't matter. But the point is that you have to have a militia. You never know what's going to happen. You occasionally have to have a global police force just in case people step out of line in foreign countries. He continues, the elder John Adams, in his inaugural address, gives national pride such a grand turn of justification that every honest citizen must look back upon the infancy of the United States with an approving smile and rejoice. That patriotism in the rulers, virtue in the people, and prosperity in the Union once crowned the expectations of hope, unveiled the sophistry of the hypocrite, and silenced the folly of foes. Mr. Adams said, if national pride is ever justifiable or excusable, it is when it springs not from power or riches, grandeur or glory, but from conviction of national innocence, information, and benevolence. Let me finish reading that paragraph before commenting on it. Now quoting, the pamphlet instead of John Adams. There is no doubt such was actually the case with our young realm at the close of the last century. Peace, prosperity, and union filled the country with religious toleration, temporal enjoyment, and virtuous enterprise. And gradually, too, when the deadly winter of the Stamp Act and the Tea Act and other close communion acts of royalty had choked the growth of freedom of speech, liberty of the press, and liberty of conscience, did light, liberty, and loyalty flourish like the cedars of God. So, patriotism has always been a battle cry of presidential hopefuls, right? Many presidential candidates today could plagiarize that paragraph word for word, and it would mean just as much today as it did in 1844. And obviously, patriotism, the idea of patriotism and its cousin, nationalism, those are controversial issues even today. The respected and venerable Thomas Jefferson, in his inaugural address, made more than 40 years ago, shews what a beautiful prospect an innocent, virtuous nation presents to the sage's eyes, where there is space for enterprise, hands for industry, heads for heroes, and hearts for moral greatness. He said, now quoting Thomas Jefferson, "A rising nation spread over a wide and fruitful land, traversing all the seas with the rich productions of their industry, engaged in commerce with nations who feel power and forget right, advancing rapidly to destinies beyond the reach of mortal eye. When I contemplate these transcendent objects and see the honor, the happiness, and the hopes of this beloved country committed to the issue and the auspices of this day, I shrink from contemplation and humble myself before the magnitude of the undertaking." Such a prospect was truly soul-stirring to a good man, but since the fathers have fallen asleep, wicked and designing men have unrobed the government of its glory, and the people, if not in dust and ashes or in sackcloth, have to lament in poverty her departed greatness, while demagogues build fires in the north and south, east and west, to keep up their spirits till it is better times. But year after year has left the people to hope till the very names of Congress or the state legislature is as horrible to the sensitive friend of his country as the house of Bluebeard is to the children, or Crockett's hell of London to meek men. This is another one of those populist war cries, battle cries, rallying cries, whatever you want to call it. The framers tried to make this a great nation with equality, but then the fathers have fallen asleep. Wicked and designing men have taken over this country. They are building fires in the north and south and east and west to keep everybody fighting with each other, to keep the focus off who the real enemies are, the elite. Joseph Smith was a member of the elite at this time. So what he is saying here, he's appealing to the everyday man, to the blue-collar workers, to the voters who comprise the massive chunk of voting bloc that got Andrew Jackson elected in the first place. That's who Joe was appealing to. It's understandable because he didn't appeal to the elites, of which he was a member of their club, right? He was an outsider to them. He didn't come from it. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was an everyday man until he got to Nauvoo, when he amassed a ton of wealth very quickly and kind of brute forced his way into the realm of the elites. They still treated him as an outsider, more of a fascination than anything else. But he did dance that line between the two groups of the lay people and the elite, and was able to curry favor with the lay people, with the blue collar workers, because those are the only people who would actually fill out his name on the ballots. When the people are secure in their rights, properly respected, then the four main pillars of prosperity, agriculture, manufactures, navigation, and commerce, need the fostering care of government. And in so goodly a country as ours, where the soil, the climate, the rivers, the lakes, and the sea coast, the productions, the timber, the minerals, and the inhabitants are so diversified, as long as you're white, of course, that a pleasing variety accommodates all tastes, trades, and calculations, it certainly is the highest point of subversion to protect the whole northern and southern, eastern, western, center, and circumference of the realm by a judicious tariff. It is an old saying and a true one. If you wish to be respected, respect yourselves. So this is an idea of, this is what we would call modern day libertarianism, right? Smaller government, more free market to do whatever it will do. With the four pillars of prosperity, agriculture, manufacturing, navigation, and commerce, those are the four things that built America. That's what he's saying. And they need the fostering care of the government instead of to be squashed by the government. And I love how he says, in so goodly a country as ours, where the soil, the climate, the rivers, the lakes, the seacoast, all of the woods that we're cutting down, all of the minerals that we're mining, the inhabitants that are so diversified that are controlling all of the land, the whites, that's what he's saying, but that's not very equal, because that's all taken at the point of a gun and a cannon from people who were living here before white Europeans got here. So it's not really all that great, is it, when it comes at such a massive price? I will adopt, in part, the language of Mr. James Madison's inaugural address. Now, quoting James Madison, to cherish peace and friendly intercourse with all nations, having correspondent dispositions to maintain sincere neutrality towards belligerent nations, to prefer in all cases amicable discussion and reasonable accommodation of differences to a decision of them by an appeal to arms, to exclude foreign intrigues and foreign partialities, so degrading to all countries and so baneful to free ones, to foster a spirit of independence too just to invade the rights of others, too proud to surrender our own, too liberal to indulge unworthy prejudices ourselves, and too elevated not to look down upon them in others, to hold the union of the states as the basis of their peace and happiness, to support the Constitution, which is the cement of the union, as well as in its limitations as in its authorities, to respect the rights and authorities reserved to the states and to the people, as equally incorporated with and essential to the success of the general system, to avoid the slightest interference with the rights of conscience or the functions of religion, so wisely exempted from civil jurisdiction, to preserve in their full energy the other salutary provisions in behalf of private and personal rights and of the freedom of the press. Now, quoting Joseph Smith, as far as intention aids in the fulfillment of duty are consummations too big with benefits not to captivate the energies of all honest men to achieve them, when they can be brought to pass by reciprocation, friendly alliances, wise legislation, and honorable treaties. Now, what he just said, quoting James Madison, of course, and then Joseph's commentary after this, and also to be clear, the entire pamphlet that we're reading here today, sure, some of it came from Joseph Smith, but the majority of this is all from William Wines Dub Phelps. He's the guy who wrote this. He's the guy who sent the handwritten copy to John Taylor. John Taylor was the one who printed these and sent them out, right? So, once again, this passage that we just read, this all only applies if you're a country of white people. Even to this day, fostering these grand friendly alliances with other countries, wise legislation, honorable treaties, all of these ideas, they only seem to apply to countries of white people. And that is arguably even the case to this day, right? Had this philosophy been applied to various Native American tribes at the time that Joseph Smith was writing this, American history would look very different today. It continues. The government has once flourished under the guidance of trusty servants, and the Honorable Mr. Monroe, that's James Monroe, in his day, while speaking of the Constitution, says, now quoting James Monroe, our commerce has been wisely regulated with foreign nations and between the states. New states have been admitted into our union. Our territory has been enlarged by fair and honorable treaty. Fair and honorable treaty? Really? James Monroe? Really? That's nice. Saying that to people who are chased out of their lands and their territories. No, it's been enlarged by fair and honorable treaty. That's cool. And with great advantage to the original states. The states respectively protected by the national government under a mild paternal system against foreign dangers, and enjoying within their separate spheres by a wise partition of power, a just proportion of the sovereignty, have improved their police, extended their settlements, and attained a strength and maturity which are the best proofs of wholesome law well administered. The argument that James Monroe is making here is that America is so awesome that can only be a result of law being well administered, right? There's a certain logic to that. It just didn't really apply to groups of people who were subjugated by the law, like slaves, like Native Americans, like women, like, any other group of people that weren't white European property owning men. Okay. That's the problem, is the way that the Constitution was crafted, the way that these first 6 presidents of the country as original founding fathers, framers of the Constitution, served and carried out their offices was all within the purview of white male exceptionalism. That it's great for these guys, but everybody else, they don't really matter much. Everybody else exists in the blind spot of these original documents and the way that these original founding fathers carried out their government. It continues. This is once again from James Monroe. And if we look to the condition of individuals, what a proud spectacle does it exhibit? Who has been deprived of any right of person and property? How about Native Americans? How about African Americans? How about Chinese Americans? How about Catholics immigrating from Ireland and Italy? I mean, really, it's anybody who wasn't a white Protestant male was deprived of rights and liberties at this time. Okay. Who restrained from offering his vows in the mode in which he prefers to the divine author of his being? It is well known that all these blessings have been enjoyed to their fullest extent, and I add with peculiar satisfaction that there has been no example of capital punishment being inflicted on anyone for the crime of high treason. So that's back to, that's the end of James Monroe quote, and we're back to Joseph Smith. What a delightful picture of power, policy, and prosperity. Truly the wise man's proverb is just, and I cannot even try to read that, but it translates roughly to righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. I think it's Hebrew. I'm not even going to try. So this is an important quote from James Monroe because it says capital punishment has never been served for the crime of high treason. That's really only true in the civil sense at the time because people were executed as a result of court-martials all the time when they committed treason. But this is kind of vacuous nonsense, and it's really a mountain of lies. And it's what we would expect to come from a politician, especially one who had committed treason and was then running for president, right? Joseph Smith was set to face the gallows if he ever stepped foot back in the state of Missouri. But as long as he got elected to president, he couldn't be shot or hung for high treason, right? Joseph continues, but this is not all. The same honorable statesman, after having had about 40 years' experience in the government under the full tide of successful experiment, gives the following commendatory assurance for the efficiency of the Magna Charta to answer its great end and aim, to protect the people and their rights. Such then is the happy government under which we live, a government adequate to every purpose for which the social compact is formed, a government elective in all its branches under which every citizen may, by his merit, obtain the highest trust recognized by the Constitution, which contains within it no cause or discord, none to put at variance one portion of the community with another, unless they were, the community, one part of the community was white and another part of the community wasn't white, right? That's where there was cause for discord. A government which protects every citizen in the full enjoyment of his rights and is able to protect the nation against injustice from foreign powers. That kind of stands on its own, doesn't it? Again, the younger John Quincy Adams, in the silver age of our country's advancement to fame, in his inaugural address, 1825, thus candidly declares the majesty of the youthful republic in its increasing greatness. Now quoting John Quincy Adams. The year of Jubilee since the first formation of our nation has just elapsed. That of the Declaration of Independence is at hand. The consummation of both was effected by this Constitution. Since that period, a population of 4 millions has multiplied to 12. A territory bounded by the Mississippi has been extended from sea to sea. New states have been admitted to the Union in numbers nearly equal to those of the First Confederation. Treaties of peace, amity, and commerce have been concluded with the principal dominions of the earth. The people of other nations, the inhabitants of regions acquired not by conquest but by compact. No. It's conquest by pen in addition to guns and cannons, right? But by compact, have been united with us in the participation of our rights and duties, of our burdens and blessings. He was writing this, Joseph Smith was quoting this literally 6 years after the Trail of Tears, and this was initially, John Quincy Adams spoke this in 1825, which was less than 10 years before the Trail of Tears. Just want to point that out. The forest has fallen by the axe of our woodsmen. The soil has been made to teem by the tillage of our farmers. Our commerce has whitened every ocean. Whitened, of course. The dominion of man over physical nature has been extended by the invention of our artists. Liberty and law have walked hand in hand. All the purposes of human association have been accomplished as effectively as under any other government on the globe, and at a cost little exceeding in a whole generation the expenditures of other nations in a single year. Great, awesome. America's so great and awesome and efficient and great, isn't it? The golden age of American expansionism, the early 1800s. Yeah. Joe continues. In continuation of such noble sentiments, General Andrew Jackson, upon his ascension to the great chair of the Chief Magistracy, said, as long as our government is administered for the good of the people and is regulated by their will, as long as it secures to us the rights of person and property, liberty and conscience, and of the press, it will be worth defending. And so long as it is worth defending, a patriotic militia will cover it with an impenetrable aegis. Okay, so, let's talk about Andrew Jackson after the next paragraph. It says, General Jackson's administration may be denominated the acme of American glory, liberty, and prosperity. For the national debt, which in 1815, on account of the late war, was $125 million, and lessened gradually, was paid up in his golden day. Jackson's golden day, and preparations were made to distribute the surplus revenue among the several states. And that august patriot, to use his own words in his farewell address, retired, leaving a great people, prosperous and happy, in the full enjoyment of liberty and peace, honored and respected by every nation in the world. That was a direct quote from General Andrew Jackson when he was leaving office. Andrew Jackson is an interesting guy. So first off, when he took over the office of president in 1828, the country was in a lot of debt because they were still recovering from the War of 1812, which lasted 3 years, waged against Great Britain. What can I say? Leave it to a Democrat to balance the damn budget, right? But the thing is, Jackson was a horrible human being who led an extremely controversial presidency. He was responsible for genocide, but hey, you know what? The account books looked really good when he left office, so it's all good. But one thing about Jackson was he illustrated to the everyday average Americans that, hey, you as an everyday average American, you can become president. You run a populist ticket, you can aspire to what I was able to acquire. You serve your country as a military, as a militia general for a while, things are going to be great for you. You'll eventually make it to president. Andrew Jackson inspired an entire generation of lay citizens who could then acquire the office of presidency, having no experience in politics. We see how well that's worked out for us. But also, further to his point, Andrew Jackson said that he left a great people, prosperous and happy, in the full enjoyment of liberty and peace, honored and respected by every nation of the world. He also incited the Panic of 1837, right? He crashed the economy for a decade upon him leaving. But no, we can forget that. We don't have to pay attention to his follies because he was treated as a great president. He freed up millions of acres of land for people to settle on. Freed up. When I say freed up, I mean he stole it from Native Americans. Okay, continuing from Joseph Smith. At the age, then, of 60 years, our blooming republic began to decline under the withering touch of Martin Van Buren. All right, so the age of Jackson's atrocities had been forgotten by the time Van Buren took office and William Henry Harrison took office after him, right? But Van Buren, everybody was still smarting after Van Buren's presidency because everybody hated him. He was viewed as a horrible president. We'll get into that in just a second here. Let's continue. Disappointed ambition, thirst for power, pride, corruption, party spirit, faction, patronage, perquisites, fame, tangling alliances, priestcraft, and spiritual wickedness in high places, struck hands and reveled in midnight splendor. Trouble, vexation, perplexity, and contention mingled with hope, fear, and murmuring, rumbled through the Union and agitated the whole nation as would an earthquake at the center of the earth of the world. heaving the sea beyond its bounds and shaking the everlasting hills. So in hopes of better times, while jealousy, hypocritical pretensions, and pompous ambition were luxuriating on the ill-gotten spoils of the people, they rose in their majesty like a tornado and swept through the land till General William Henry Harrison appeared as a star among the storm clouds for better weather. All right, Van Buren. Thing is, Martin Van Buren inherited a nation on the brink of financial collapse, right? The Republicans put measures into our economy that ensured the collapse of 2008 that Obama inherited, right? The same thing happened with the transition from Andrew Jackson to Martin Van Buren. People at this time hated Van Buren because he was the president during a massive financial collapse and during a major depression. But those people refused to see what Andrew Jackson had done that actually caused the Panic of 1837. He set all the dominoes up. It was just his leaving office and Martin Van Buren taking that office that caused the dominoes to actually fall. Joe continues. The calm came in the language of that venerable patriot, Harrison. This is when William Henry Harrison, the hero of Tippecanoe, right? This is the guy who apparently killed Tecumseh. Him and, 30 other people who claimed that they were the guy who killed Tecumseh. Anyway, that venerable patriot, Harrison, in his inaugural address, while descanting upon the merits of the Constitution and its framers, thus expressed himself, now quoting William Henry Harrison. There were in it features which appeared not to be in harmony with their ideas of a simple representative democracy or republic, and knowing the tendency of power to increase itself, particularly when executed by a single individual, predictions were made that, at no very remote period, the government would terminate in virtual monarchy. What would that look like? The government would terminate in virtual monarchy. It would not become me to say that the fears of these patriots have been already realized, but as I certainly believe that the tendency of measures and of men's opinions for some years past has been in that direction, it is, I conceive, strictly proper that I should take this occasion to repeat the assurances I have heretofore given of my determination to arrest the progress of that tendency if it really exists, and restore the government to its pristine health and vigor. End quote. This is important because William Henry Harrison was a guy who was a drain the swamp kind of guy. He was a military guy. He was the hero of Tippecanoe. He was a grassroots guy. He was a Whig candidate, but he wasn't seen as being, one of the silver spoon elites. He was, the hero of Tippecanoe. He was a rough, scruff military general who killed Tecumseh, and he got elected to the populist ticket. And he was also, in his inaugural speech talking about draining the swamp. And a month later, he died of pneumonia or consumption or something, or poisoning or something. There's dispute about that fact to this day. Because he died during his presidency, a lot of people who were hoping that he would root out the corruption that was in government in, Washington, they were hoping that he would be able to get rid of some of this. And when he died, that rang the death knell that corruption had completely overrun the government. And that sentiment is captured in Joe's next passage. This good man died before he had the opportunity of applying one balm to ease the pain of our groaning country. And I am willing the nation should be the judge, whether General Harrison, in his exalted station, upon the eve of his entrance into the world of spirits, told the truth or not. With acting President John Tyler's 3 years of perplexity and pseudo-Whig Democrat reign to heal the breaches or show the wounds, secundum artem, according to Art, subsequent events, all things considered, Van Buren's downfall, Harrison's exit, and Tyler's self-sufficient turn to the whole, go to shew, as a Chaldean might exclaim, I'm not going to try and quote the Chaldean here, but it translates into, certainly there is a God in heaven to reveal secrets. So this all is just playing into the narrative that in 1844, the world was on the brink of collapse, just like it apparently is today. Right? That's the whole point. And it's not surprising to see that Joe was not only trying to rally up these backcountry general blue-collar folk to be his voters, but he was also selling the fear-mongering. The world is going to end. We got to, we got to live for today. We got to, fix the world before it goes completely to hell in a handbasket. That's the point that he's making here. And he continues to to really dig in on this, that corruption is going to end this beautiful government, as William Henry Harrison wanted to restore it to its former glory, but then he died and John Tyler was just one more of these corrupt Washington elites. No honest man can doubt for a moment, but the glory of American liberty is on the wane, and that calamity and confusion will sooner or later destroy the peace of the people. Yeah, I mean, this is 20 years before the Civil War, so yeah, that's a fair assumption. Speculators will urge a national bank as a savior of credit and comfort. A hireling pseudo-priesthood will plausibly push abolition doctrines and doings and human rights is in scare quotes, into Congress and into every other place where conquest smells of fame or opposition swells to popularity. Democracy, Whiggery, and cliquery will attract their elements and foment divisions among the people to accomplish fancied schemes and accumulate power, while poverty driven to despair, like hunger forcing its way through a wall, will break through the statues of men to save life and mend the breach in prison glooms. Yeah, opposition swells to popularity, conquest smells of fame, democracy, Whiggery, and cliquery. Those are the things that are actually going to take over until all of our human rights are subverted. These are talking points today. Just switched out some of the words, some of the nouns here. We're still kind of waiting for these things to happen, right? For the earth, for the government, and for our country to completely devolve into anarchy, where people are still looking forward to this day when this finally happens. There are, of course, plenty of talking heads in media and politicians who are hoping for this, or talking about it happening. Anyway, Joe continues. A still higher grade of what the nobility of nations call great men will dally with all rights in order to smuggle a fortune at one fell swoop. Yeah, politicians looking out for themselves. Imagine that. Yeah. Mortgage Texas, possess Oregon, and claim all the unsettled regions of the world for hunting and trapping, and should be a humble, honest man, red, black, or white, exhibit a better title. These gentry have only to clothe the judge with richer ermine, and spangle the lawyer's fingers with finer rings, to have the judgment of his peers and the honor of his lords as a pattern of honesty, virtue, and humanity. While the motto hangs on the nation's escutcheon, every man has his price. See, the thing about this campaign pamphlet is a lot of it is vacuous nonsense, this included, but there's a certain nugget of truth that rings true throughout that paragraph, especially, is that rich people are going to continue to get rich. Every man has his price. Corruption, power, it corrupts absolutely, right? These are all issues that are that exist through time immemorial. The rich get richer. Power begets power. The little guys foot the bill. Little guys pay the taxes. The people at the top don't pay the taxes. They get all the money, right? These trends have always existed in every single form of government across the entire world for as long as we have history. What's even more interesting about this is when somebody like Joseph Smith, a wealthy elite at this time, is using these buzzwords and talking points to rally up the populist groundswell in order to support him, right? Everything is horrible. All the rich people are taking all your money. You're paying all the taxes, but elect me, Joseph Smith, the prophet of the God, yet one more rich white guy, and I'll make all your problems go away. Imagine that. Selling you the problem and then selling you on the fact that I am your savior. I am the fix to the problem that I just told you about. That resonates a lot more when that problem is actually a legitimate problem. It continues. Now, oh, people, turn unto the Lord and live and reform this nation. Frustrate the designs of wicked men. Reduce Congress at least one half. What? Reduce Congress? 2 senators from a state and 2 members to 1,000,000 of population will do more business than the army that now occupy the halls of the national legislature. Pay them $2 and they're board per diem except Sundays. That is more than the farmer gets and he lives honestly. Curtail the offices of government in pay, number, and power, for the Philistine lords have shorn our nation of its goodly locks in the lap of Delilah. Okay, so let's deal with that. Small government. That's a very frequent political platform issue, right? But I would argue that rarely are major societal ills made better when government is reduced, right? There's a reason that we wait for 3 hours in line at the DMV to fill out one form and turn it in, proving that we are who we say we are, right? There's a reason why all of our government agencies lag behind and all of our court systems are dramatically overwhelmed, while all of our private companies are better in nearly every possible metric, right? Because government has been shrunken through systematic vilification as a political platform. But hey, you know what? Let's just remove all regulation. Things will always get better for everybody if we just get rid of all of the regulation, right? Well, the thing is especially in 1844, those are hollow assurances to a slave or to a 4-year-old coal miner or something at this time, right? So there is a need for government for the protection of people, by the people, for the people, right? But here, Joe is advocating for smaller government. That's a very common party platform thing. Okay, continuing on. Petition your state legislators to pardon every convict in their several penitentiaries. To pardon every convict. Blessing them as they go and saying to them in the name of the Lord, go thy way and sin no more. That is truly an appalling platform item. Pardon every criminal. That's going to make society awesome, right? It continues. Advise your legislators when they make laws for larceny, burglary, or any felony to make the penalty applicable to work upon roads, public works, or any place where the culprit can be taught more wisdom and more virtue and become more enlightened. Rigor and seclusion will never do as much to reform the propensities of man as reason and friendship. Okay, look, I'm all for reforming our criminal justice system and abolishing for-profit prisons, right? But the thing is, very little actual rehabilitation happens in our current system, and I'm sure that it was a lot worse in the 19th century. But the idea of just letting everyone go and then telling them to be nice, that is absolutely insane to me. He continues, though. Murder can only claim confinement or death. Let the penitentiaries be turned into seminaries of learning, where intelligence like the angels of heaven would banish such fragments of barbarism. Imprisonment for debt is a meaner practice than the savage tolerates with all his ferocity. Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. Let's discuss that very briefly. I get reforming the criminal justice system. I'm sure it was in major need of reform in the 19th century. I understand that. Creating a system that actually has, rehabilitative measures in it instead of throwing people in cages, that sounds great. But what he is advocating here, if you're reading between the lines, is let every convict go, but then put them in re-education camps of religion, right? Let the penitentiaries be turned into seminaries. That's what he says. That's kind of terrifying because suddenly people who are criminals, the purview, the aspect, the scope of what makes a person a criminal can suddenly widen to someone who isn't, let's say, Protestant. Or, somebody who happens to be Muslim can be considered a criminal. That's a terrifying prospect. That's absolutely terrifying. But of course, he concludes with love conquers all, so everything's going to be okay, right? He continues, petition also, ye goodly inhabitants of the slave states, your legislators to abolish slavery by the year 1850 or now, and save the abolitionist from reproach and ruin, infamy and shame. Okay, so we discussed in the last episode Joe's fluid morality on the question of slavery throughout his entire ministry. But the thing is, Joe could see the writing on the wall, right? Joe could tell where the world of politics and slavery was headed, and anybody with their head screwed on the right direction could tell that slavery was on its way out as an institution. It's important to realize that he was taking this stance because it was politically advantageous, right? Whether or not his own morals played into this platform item of abolitionism, that's a subject of speculation only. His methods of abolishing slavery, though, are quite interesting. Here he goes. Pray Congress to pay every man a reasonable price for his slaves out of the surplus of revenue arising from the sale of public lands and from the deduction of pay from the members of Congress. Okay, so first off, deducting the pay of members of Congress in order to purchase slaves from the slave owners in order to free them. The amount of money that Congress people are paid as far as a budget item in the government is Skittles. There's almost nothing there, right? So reducing their pay a certain amount, that's not going to buy very many slaves at a systematic level. And when it's saying buying the slaves, that's paying the slave owners the value of those slaves and then releasing the slaves and going through abolition that method, right? But the actual source of revenue that he's discussing here arising from the sale of public lands. Okay, all of the land that us Americans are stealing from the natives, sell that at a good price and buy the slaves back from the slave owners. That's what he's saying. Just so that those slave owners are fairly compensated for their troubles of owning people as property. That is appalling to me. This is not robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is committing genocide on Mexicans to put Africans on probation, right? I can scarcely think of a more deplorable way to fix the 19th century social issue of slavery than doing it Joe's proposed way here. But of course, he proposes the way of doing it, and then he falls right back into rhetoric. Break off the shackles from the poor black man and hire him to labor like other human beings. For an hour of virtuous liberty on earth is worth a whole eternity of bondage. Abolish the practice in the army and navy of trying men by court-martial for desertion. If a soldier or marine runs away, send him his wages with the instruction that his country will never trust him again. He has forfeited his honor. So that's an interesting subject, excusing deserters instead of considering them AWOL or treasonous. Just excuse them, send them their last paycheck and say, okay, you've lost your honor, but so be it. That's an interesting idea. It's kind of appealing to someone who may be an avowed pacifist, that if you're drafted into the military and, against your will and you say, I don't want to do this, and you desert, then you just sent your last paycheck and it's like, okay, you don't have any honor in the governmental perspective, but you know what? That's okay. You're not going to be tried for desertion. It's an interesting prospect. It's an interesting possibility. And, that's something that, reasonable people could have disagreements over, right? He continues, make honor the standard with all men. Be sure that good is rendered for evil in all cases, and the whole nation, like a kingdom of kings and priests, will rise up with righteousness and be respected as wise and worthy on earth, and as just and holy for heaven by Jehovah, the author of perfection. Make it a Christian nation, a Jesus nation, right? And honor being the standard with all men. That's an interesting idea. That's like, hey, we can all be friends, right? I can trust you. Just be nice. Just be trustworthy. Just be honorable. And everybody's good. Sure, that works until one person isn't honorable. And it turns out the world is filled with dishonorable people. So, great. This whole system falls apart just by introducing one guy who's a dick. That's it. That's the whole problem, right? More economy in the national and state governments would make less taxes among the people. More equality through the cities, towns, and country would make less distinction among the people, and more honesty and familiarity in societies would make less hypocrisy and flattery in all branches of community, and open, frank, candid decorum to all men in this boasted land of liberty would beget esteem, confidence, union, and love. And the neighbor from any state or from any country of whatever color, clime, or tongue, could rejoice when he put his foot on the sacred soil of freedom and exclaim, the very name of American is fraught with friendship. Oh, then create confidence, restore freedom, break down slavery, banish imprisonment for debt, and be in love, fellowship, and peace with all the world. Remember that honesty is not subject to law. The law was made for transgressors. Wherefore a Dutchman might exclaim, Ein ehrlicher Name ist besser als Reichtum. I tried my best. He translated it for us, though. A good name is better than riches. Okay. Once again, this is all the idea of like, be nice, be great, be kind to each other, be honorable, but it all falls apart when you say, oh, but that guy over there is a dick, right? all of these words arranged in the order that Joseph arranged them in, they actually don't really mean anything. It sounds so nice, though. Be honest, make America great, less hypocrisy, more equality, more diversity. The thing is those are all just platitudes. They don't mean anything coming from a person who has absolutely no plan or idea to actually enact any of these high-minded ideas, right? I gotta say, as a politician, Joseph Smith swinging par for the course here, right? For the accommodation of the people in every state and territory, let Congress shew their wisdom by granting a national bank, with branches in each state and territory, where the capital stock shall be held by the nation for the mother bank, and by the states and territories for the branches, and whose officers and directors shall be elected yearly by the people with wages at the rate of $2 per day for services, which several banks shall never issue any more bills than the amount of capital stock in her vaults and the interest. So, the gold standard, okay. The net gain of the mother bank shall be applied to the national revenue, and that of the branches of the states and territories' revenues. And the bills shall be par throughout the nation, which will mercifully cure that fatal disorder known in cities as brokerage, and leave the people's money in their own pockets. Okay. This was a massive issue. The idea of a federal or a national bank, that was a major hot button issue of the early 1800s. President Andrew Jackson vehemently opposed a national bank. He vetoed the charter of the renewal bill for the second national bank, and then went about removing the federal funds from that national bank, and then signed the specie circular. And all of those were moves that collapsed the economy and sent America into a massive depression known as the Panic of 1837. The first national bank had been established by George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, but the board who ran it were all industrialist businessmen with tons of political and social power and tons of wealth, which helped subjugate the lower class Americans and slave-owning farmers. Jackson made his opposition to a federal bank a rally cry, and formed his anti-federal bank into, this idea of the anti-federal bank into the original platform of the Democrat Party. Joe planted his flag firmly in favor of a federal bank, which was the Whig position, and therefore the position of the wealthy industrialist folk, of which Joseph Smith was a part. So we can see the duplicitous nature throughout this entire campaign pamphlet. In many times, he's trying to appeal to the blue-collar, small property-owning, good-working folk, and people who work in the factories, people who actually do all of the work and pay the majority of the taxes. But at the same time, in an entire paragraph about a federal bank, he's appealing to the wealthy business owners. It's smart. It's covering multiple bases, but it is duplicitous. Give every man his constitutional freedom, and the president full power to send an army to suppress mobs. You wonder why that's in there, right? And the state's authority to repeal and impugn that relic of folly which makes it necessary for the governor of a state to make the demand of the president for troops in cases of invasion or rebellion. The governor himself may be a mobber, like Lilburn Boggs. And instead of being punished, as he should be for murder and treason, he may destroy the very lives, rights, and property he should protect. Okay, so that chunk of this paragraph, that is very obviously a result of the Mormon treatment in Missouri. Joe wanted President Martin Van Buren to call in the militia to reinstate the Mormons to their claimed property in Missouri, but President Van Buren, of course, refused to help. Joe wanted himself as president to have the power to call a national militia to a given location, like, let's say, Missouri, for example, just a wild, out-of-the-blue example, even if the governor of Missouri opposed having that militia in their state. You wonder why he put that in there. It continues, like the Good Samaritan, send every lawyer as soon as he repents and obeys the ordinances of heaven to preach the gospel to the destitute, without purse or scrip, pouring in the oil and wine. A learned priesthood is certainly more honorable than an hireling clergy. So make sure that all lawyers are actually preachers. That is also terrifying, because that means you would assume that the result of their lawyering largely comes down to their interpretations of the Bible. This is the Christian Sharia law, isn't it? Isn't that what he's advocating for? It shouldn't be a surprise, right? He was a religious despot. He wanted to rule a theocracy. So if you have your lawyers, they're all theologians. Hey, great. That's one step closer towards the Mormon theocracy, isn't it? As to the contiguous territories to the United States, wisdom would direct no tangling alliance. Oregon belongs to this government honorably, and when we have the red man's consent, let the union spread from the east to the west sea. And if Texas petitions Congress to be adopted among the Sons of Liberty, give her the right hand of fellowship, and refuse not the same friendly grip to Canada and Mexico. And when the right arm of freemen is stretched out in the character of a navy for the protection of rights, commerce, and honor, let the iron eyes of power watch from Maine to Mexico and from California to Colombia. Thus may union be strengthened and foreign speculation prevented from opposing broadside to broadside. Okay. This was, we already discussed Joe's views, well, the presidential candidate, Joseph Smith. We discussed the views of his platform on slavery. The other hot button issue of the 1840s was expansionism. Now, Joe took a very hardline expansionist view of American territory annexation. Not only annexation of Oregon, but the annexation of Texas. These are the greatest political issues of the mid-1840s. So Joe, in his campaign pamphlet, not only encourages the annexation of Oregon and Texas, but also of Canada and Mexico. That's pretty sweeping, but it's also understandable, right? If Joe was to be president, he wanted to be president of as much territory as humanly possible, even including the entire continent of North America. 70 years have done much for this goodly land. They have burst the chains of oppression and monarchy and multiplied its inhabitants from 2 to 20 million, with a proportionate share of knowledge, keen enough to circumnavigate the globe, draw the lightning from the clouds, and cope with all the crowned heads of the world. Then why, oh why, will a once flourishing people not arise phoenix-like over the cinders of Martin Van Buren's power and over the sinking fragments and smoking ruins of other catamount politicians, and over the windfalls of Thomas Hart Benton, John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, Silas Wright, and a caravan of other equally unfortunate law doctors, and cheerfully help to spread a plaster and bind up the burnt, bleeding wounds of a sore but blessed country. The Southern people are hospitable and noble. They will help to rid so free a country of every vestige of slavery, whenever they are assured of an equivalent for their property. No, the Southerners would not help the country to rid itself of slavery. In fact, they literally fought a war over the question of slavery. There's a swing and a miss from the prophet of God. The country will be full of money and confidence when a national bank of 20 millions and a state bank in every state with 1 million or more gives a tone to monetary manners and make a circulating medium as valuable as the purses of a whole community as in the coffers of a speculating banker or broker. So advocating for, standardized print money, that's a great idea. That didn't exist at this time, right? There were banknotes that are proprietary banknotes. There were banknotes that were from banks that were chartered by states. And then there was specie. There was actual gold and silver. They didn't have the greenbacks that we use today. That's a product of the Civil War. The people may have faults, but they never should be trifled with. I think Mr. William Pitt's quotation on the British Parliament of Mr. Matthew Prior's couplet for the husband and wife to apply to the course which the King and Ministry of England should pursue to the then colonies of the now United States might be a genuine rule of action for some of the breath-made men in high places to use towards the posterity of that noble daring people. Be to her faults a little blind, be to her virtues very kind. That's a nice little couplet, isn't it? We have had Democratic presidents, Whig presidents, a pseudo-democratic Whig president, and now it is time to have a president of the United States. And let the people of the whole Union, like the inflexible Romans, wherever they find a promise made by a candidate that is not practiced as an officer, hurl the miserable sycophant from his exaltation, as God did Nebuchadnezzar, to crop the grass of the field with a beast's heart among the cattle. I get that. but it may not be the best idea to be saying we should act like the inflexible Romans because the Roman Empire had collapsed at this time. At least the western side of it had, right? I mean, the Enlightenment had only happened, 150 years. It had only begun 150 years before this was being written, right? I mean, it's the early 1600s that it's pretty agreed upon. The Enlightenment kind of kicked off and began late 1500s, early 1600s. That's only 150 to 200 years before this time he's talking about. And that was, came as a result of the Dark Ages, the medieval period where the Western Roman Empire didn't have a single government the way that the Roman Empire had established prior to the fall of the Roman Empire, right? It's just interesting. Maybe pick a better example. A better example of an empire that never fell. Oh, wait, there hasn't been one of those. Crap, never mind. There isn't a better example. Okay, he continues. Mr. Van Buren said in his inaugural address that he went into the presidential chair the inflexible and uncompromising opponent of every attempt on the part of Congress to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia against the wishes of the slaveholding states, and also with a determination equally decided to resist the slightest interference with it in the states where it exists. Yeah, Martin Van Buren, he was a Democrat candidate. He said states' rights, the same way Andrew Jackson said states' rights. And Andrew Jackson had 5 or 6 dozen slaves when he took office. So cool. Yeah, that's not surprising. That was the Democrat position. The Whig position was, largely abolitionist. It varied. It varied among candidates who, identified as Whigs, but by and large, that's where the disagreements came. There were the Southern Democrats who were slave-owning states' rights Democrats. Then there were the Northern Whigs, the industrialists, the anti-slavery people, Martin Van Buren was a states' rights guy. Poor little Matty, Martin, Matty, made his rhapsodical suite with the fact before his eyes that the state of New York, his native state, had abolished slavery without a struggle or a groan. Great God, how independent. From henceforth slavery is tolerated where it exists. Constitution or no constitution, people or no people, right or wrong. Vox Matty, vox diaboli. You gotta love that Joe has just decided to call Martin Matty using nicknames. How childish to use nicknames in a public forum. How dare he? The voice of Matty, the voice of the devil. That's what he said in, Latin there. And peradventure his great sub-treasury scheme was a piece of the same mind. But the man and his measures have such a striking resemblance to the anecdote of the Welshman and his cart tongue, that when the Constitution was so long that it allowed slavery at the capital of a free people, it could not be cut off. Slavery was an institution too big to fail. That's what it's saying. But when it was so short that it needed a sub-treasury to save the funds of the nation, it could be spliced. Oh, granny, granny, what a long tail our puss has got. As a Greek might say, hysterion proterion, the cart before the horse, but his mighty whisk through the great national fire for the presidential chestnuts burnt the locks of his glory with the blaze of his folly. Okay. That was just an entire 3 paragraphs of saying how horrible Martin Van Buren was as a president. Joe had his history with Martin Van Buren, and he now finally, after this, he gets into his own campaign promises after a long treatise on how great all of the past presidents were, except for that fop or a fool that he called, Martin Van Buren. Matty, the voice of Matty, the voice of the devil. All right. 1 paragraph. That's all we get of Joe's own campaign promises. 1 paragraph. Here we are. We're almost done, everybody. I know this has been kind of long. In the United States, the people are the government, and their united voice is the only sovereign that should rule, the only power that should be obeyed, and the only gentleman that should be honored, at home and abroad, on the land and on the sea. Wherefore, were I the President of the United States, by the voice of a virtuous people, I would honor the old paths of the venerated fathers of freedom. I would walk in the tracks of the illustrious patriots who carried the ark of the government upon their shoulders with an eye single to the glory of the people. And when the people petitioned to abolish slavery in the slave states, I would use all honorable means to have their prayers granted and give liberty to the captive by paying the Southern gentleman a reasonable equivalent for his property, his humans that are regarded as property. Good. Okay. That the whole nation might be free indeed. When the people petitioned for a national bank, I would use my best endeavors to have their prayers answered and establish one on national principles to save taxes and make them the controllers of its ways and means. And when the people petitioned to possess the territory of Oregon or any other contiguous territory, I would lend the influence of a chief magistrate to grant so reasonable a request, that they might extend the mighty efforts and enterprise of a free people from the east to the west sea, to make the wilderness blossom as the rose. And when a neighboring realm petitioned to join the union of the Sons of Liberty, my voice would be, come, yea, come Texas, come Mexico, come Canada, and come all the world. Let us be brethren, and I can rule you all as a theocratic dictator. I added that. Let us be one great family, and let there be universal peace. Abolish the cruel custom of prisons, except certain cases, penitentiaries, and court-martials for desertion, and let reason and friendship reign over the ruins of ignorance and barbarity. Yea, I would, as the universal friend of man, open the prisons. Universal friend, still a line from other religious leaders at the time. Anyway, universal friend of man, open the prisons, open the eyes, open the ears, and open the hearts of all men to behold and enjoy freedom, unadulterated freedom. And God, who once cleansed the violence from the earth with a flood, whose Son laid down his life for the salvation of all his Father gave him out of the world, and who has promised that he will come and purify the world again with fire in the last days, should be supplicated by me for the good of all people. With the highest esteem, I am a friend of virtue and of the people. Signed, Joseph Smith. There you go. Let it be said, let it be written, let it be done. This was Joseph Smith's presidential platform. This is what he wanted to accomplish as President of the United States. What I find interesting, as kind of a high-level analysis here, is everything that he said, none of it was revolutionary, right? Nothing in this pamphlet, beyond abolishing prisons, which is bonkers, nothing in this pamphlet actually sets him apart from other candidates, other than, like, this is just a synthesis of frequent campaign pamphlets contemporary with his time. He did invoke God and Jesus more than Henry Clay, but otherwise, this campaign pamphlet was pretty standard. Now comes the question, does a campaign pamphlet like this a serious presidential candidate make? No. Joseph Smith was never a serious contender for the office, in spite of what he and his fellow Mormon leaders thought. However, an important distinction needs to be made here. Just because Joe wasn't actually a viable candidate, that doesn't mean that he didn't treat the issue like he wasn't a viable candidate. Joe had many goals in life. He achieved many with relatively few negative consequences. More power, more control, more people looking to him as their leaders. This was Joe's gluttony. Power was his vice. Because the presidency was actually unattainable, that made Joe want it even more. And he wasn't one to give up on his deepest personal desires at the drop of a hat with a stone in it. Truly, Joseph Smith knew this more than just about anybody alive at this time. The forbidden fruit is the sweetest to taste. Joining us today are two of the hosts of literally my newest favorite podcast, Mary and Shelley from Latter-day Lesbian. Mary, Shelley, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
We're your new favorite?
That's
Shit,
fantastic.
That's awesome. I'm so excited.
I used to be a truck driver, and I had a weekly rotation of like 25 podcasts, but since I no longer do that, I don't have all the windshield time. The number of podcasts that are in my weekly rotation has shrunken quite a bit, but your podcast seriously has come into my weekly rotation because it's so much fun to hear an ex-Mormon teaching a non-Mormon about Mormonism.
It's a train wreck, Bryce.
You know, I did, having been Mormon my whole life, and you probably relate is you don't realize how crazy it is. You don't realize what terms are actually Mormon terms. So I'll just be talking, and Mary will look at me like my head's spinning around. And she's like, "What are you? What is this? Like, the Leahona? It's like, I don't know what are you smoking?"
Yeah, it's handy because we had a Mormon as well as a guest, and Shelley and this Mormon Diana we had on the show together. Well, she's ex-Mormon now, but the two of them, they went so quickly with this Mormon stuff, and I was like, whoa, hold up. Wait for the Never Mormon to catch up.
You can't
define some of this stuff for me, because I don't know what you're talking about.
A lifetime of learning crazy shit. You will never catch up.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's nutty
Us
stuff.
Mormons, we got a lot of insider baseball that we use.
Yeah.
And it's so fun because I co-host a podcast with a Never Mormon as well. We read through the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's so much fun to experience the learning curve as it goes. Because I came to understand this. Like, you can read the Book of Mormon, you can read the Doctrine and Covenants, you can read the New Testament, you can read the Bishop's Handbook manuals if you want, but you still don't understand what Mormonism is about and what it's like to go to church. Right. Like, there's so much cultural knowledge that is transferred when you're born into the covenant. Shelley, what is it like for you as a co-host trying to teach Mary about the church? Do you find like you struggle to find the words for it, or like, is it, what, tell me what it's like.
Right. So interesting, when Mary and I first started dating and I was telling her about just my life, and I honestly didn't realize how strange my life was until I started seeing her reactions to things that I would say. And then I would think, why is she so weirded out by this? But then you start listening to yourself talk and you're like, dude, I sound like a crazy person, a legit crazy person. So it's actually it's fun, and it's definitely been therapeutic for me to get all these things off my chest and get, be reaffirmed by Mary that is crazy. You were raised in a cult. You're damaged because of the cult, not just like you don't realize it in Mormon groups because everyone's doing and saying the same thing. But to be able to have a Never Mormon react to the crazy shit is amazing. And it's working with our audience as well, because I would say most of our listeners think that they're alone. They don't understand why they feel the way they do. And then they hear us talk about it and they're like, shit, that's my experience. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one. And then it turns into laughter of, oh my gosh, I can't believe we believe that. Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the episode where I figured out that Adam and Eve went to Missouri.
It's called Adam on Diamond, Mary. Oh, that's another thing we do with Joe. We'll start arguing with each other, trying to explain something, and then remembering, oh, it's all made up anyway. Why are we taking sides on something it doesn't matter? It's made up.
Oh, Mary, do you mind giving us your catchphrase, because it perfectly summarizes every single episode?
Yeah, Bryce, I'm starting to think this Mormon shit's all fake. Just starting to think so.
Mary made a T-shirt with a picture of a temple on it with Moroni and everything, and the T-shirt says, I'm starting to think it's all fake. And people love them. A listener wrote in the other day, and she said, I wore my T-shirt. She lives in Utah. I wore my T-shirt to the grocery store, and I noticed the old guy that was checking was the checker, kept looking at my shirt, and then as he handed me my change, he smiled and said, it is fake.
Yeah, he was in agreement.
That is, I'm curious, per your download numbers, you get to see geography. Any idea, a best estimate, what percentage of your listeners actually come from Utah?
Yeah, I think it's about 15%.
15?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was more.
Well, everyone's spread out. Well, it might be more. You know what? I'm going to look right now. I know Virginia is about 12 or 13%. Mm-hmm. So Utah is definitely more than Virginia.
I think we also have a lot in Arizona, Idaho, mostly your Mormon places.
The whole Morador, right?
There's a lot in California, too.
California's got a shit ton of ex-Mormons as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anywhere that Brigham Young could have said, go settle and bring me some wives. We have listeners.
Okay, so I have something that I want to talk to you two about. But first, in order to introduce that, I want to ask, what is your show like? Somebody's never listened to Latter-day Lesbian before. They've never heard the voice of Shelley or Mary before. if they hit download and they start listening, aside from the LDL letter episodes, what are they going to hear on the everyday average episode?
Me? You're
talk,
throwing to
Mary?
me? She's nodding at me like, you take it.
Well, I'm always over talking everyone, so I'm trying to.
Well, I feel like we've evolved a whole lot because when we first started out, we didn't know what we were doing. Our sound wasn't great yet. The two of us are like, welcome to Latter-day Lesbian.
now we're like, give me the mic. I got something to say.
That's right. Yeah. So I feel like we're just in such a better place now and we have fun segments.
Yeah.
So basically we're just sort of unwrapping or unpacking Mormonism and other religions too in a way that's like fun, funny, digestible segments. We laugh a lot at it.
You have to.
Yeah.
I would say probably the first 10 episodes roughly are mostly my leaving Mormonism and coming out of the closet story. Born in the covenant, raised Mormon, got married young, had
Born in
7
the covenant.
Born in the covenant, damn it. I'm wearing that badge.
Covenant.
Don't you wish you were born in the covenant? See,
Not
that's
really.
a film pod right there. Just like that. You just trip over something.
Whose covenant?
The covenant I made with God. Here,
Okay.
handshake. No, I'm
You
kidding.
mean Joseph
Covenant
Smith?
that involves special handshakes and whatnot.
Yeah,
code names,
exactly.
yeah.
And special underwear. By the way, my new name is Emma.
Emma. Ah,
so
okay.
those of you listening,
So that means you went to the temple on September 27th, right?
right.
with
Everyone
all the
that
other
day.
special Emmas.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, yeah, those first few episodes is talking about me leaving the church, coming out of the closet, recognize my sexuality.
And don't forget the 7 children.
The 7 kids. Of course, I had to pop out the kids as I was birthing my way into heaven, and being completely overwhelmed, having to tell my husband I'm gay, he and I splitting up, and then kind of processing all the aftermath of that. And, there's a lot of times where I break down into tears. There's time where I'm angry, yelling, and there's times where just literally cracking up and just bantering. So
Yeah, and I think it's not as much about Shelley's story anymore because what started happening is we started.
told it.
She did, and it keeps unfolding. Something
Yeah.
will remind her of another story, and then her story continues that way. But we kept hearing from so many people, so many listeners writing in that it suddenly became about everybody's story.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Can I share with the two of you my journey through listening to your podcast?
I wish you would.
Please. Yeah.
I started listening episode 9. I was noticing on Facebook, I was getting all these notifications in various groups I follow, Latter-day Lesbian podcast. So episode 9 had just aired and I'm like, all right, I'm going to listen. And as I was hearing Shelley tell her story, I'm like, this is interesting, but it doesn't, not a whole lot of it resonates with me because I left the church when I was like 17, right? So I didn't get married in the temple. I didn't have the 7 kids. I didn't come out as gay and have to leave my partner. And a lot of like the data points that you hit didn't exactly hit with me. And I could feel the co-hosting dynamic evolving and developing and getting better and better with each episode. So I listened to those episodes and I'm like, yeah, this is good. I'm going to keep my eye on this podcast, see how it develops. And then it kind of just slipped away from my mind until about 5 weeks ago, a friend reached out and was like, have you been listening to Latter-day Lesbian? And I told him, yeah, I mean, this is N.A., which I know you two know N.A. Johnson, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, I listened to them when they first started, but I haven't listened ever since then. And he's like, they're crushing it. You need to listen. So then I went through the rest of the backlog and it was up to like episode 30 or 28 or 27 or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Like they have come really, really far in just, the 15 episodes since I stopped listening to them. This is fantastic. And that's when I felt a lot more where it was resonating with me, especially Shelley, when you talk about your interactions with your parents, because I feel like I and a lot of ex-Mormons can resonate of like the male dominionist dynamic within the parent relationship and the mom trying to like be the peacemaker. And like, that's where you spoke to my heart, where I'm like, this is me. I am feeling her tell the story. And that's what really hit me. And that's when your podcast made it into my weekly rotation of like, I can't wait for the next Latter-day Lesbian episode to come out because I want to hear what the next fun pod is. I want to hear the next, I want to hear the next segments and I want to hear more of these stories because I feel like it really speaks to my experience.
Gotcha.
That's
Wow, that's good to
fantastic.
know. That's some awesome feedback, and I'm glad that people are able to relate on other things besides just gay ex-Mormon, because there's a
And
lot more
lesbian
to
with
it.
kids.
And I think that so many people can relate with dealing with parents who are Mormon or have been Mormon. And there's just something about Mormon parents that's hard.
Yeah, totally.
When you leave, very hard. So I'm
Well,
glad,
they're
I'm
very
glad that it's
rigid,
helped you.
potentially.
Yeah, super rigid.
Well, thank you, NA, for giving us a little plug there.
Yeah, thanks, NA.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
also thanks to
appreciate
Alice
that.
for actually connecting us and sparking up the
Oh, yeah.
conversation that led to this this guest spot exchange.
Oh, awesome.
I know.
Alice, by the way, was our very first patron that I didn't have as an actual friend ahead of time. So she's been supporting us since the beginning of time. She's amazing.
Alice is so cool.
And she's very cool and has an amazing back tattoo, by
She
the way.
does. She was at our 100,000
pretty awesome.
download party and wearing a dress that was kind of open in the back, and she got a lot of looks. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
Beautiful
a
tattoo.
raven. It's lovely.
I first met Alice at ReasonCon #2. I think it was 2017. And I love the goth look. I love it when people can pull off the goth look. I have never met somebody that can pull off the goth look better than Alice can, right? Just
Oh, for
she
sure.
hands down.
crushes
If
it.
you
Yeah.
look through her Facebook pictures, she's got like the full-on trench coat, like the top hat
yeah.
look, and it is
Oh, yeah, it's
baller
awesome.
as hell.
Yeah,
It
it is.
really is. The corset, the
Yeah.
chunky shoes.
Oh,
yeah, she crushed
absolutely.
it. So good.
Okay, so anyway, to round out this little spot that we're doing here, I thought that if it's okay with the two of you, we could appropriate a segment from your show and use it on this show, the fun pod. What is the fun pod?
fun
Because
pod.
I got a great fun pod, and let's see if we can stump Mary. But introduce it. What is the fun pod?
So because there were so many times when I would be talking and Mary's like, "What are you saying?" Because it was very Mormon-y. We came up with the fucked up Mormon phrase of the day. And a listener actually said in the acronym, like, "Oh, we love the film pods," and people were sending them all in. So it just does mean the fucked up Mormon phrase of the day.
It's the fucked up Mormon phrase of the day.
And you just heard it. Okay, so let's do the naked Mormonism version of the fucked up Mormon phrase of the day. Okay, Mary,
Yes.
popcorn popping on the apricot tree.
You're fucking her up bad,
What?
Bryce.
That's not actually possible. You know that, right?
Is it?
Popcorn
You need more faith.
popping on the apricot tree? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so this reminds me of an expression my mother used to say when some things like hindsight is 2020. Like, well, that's like locking the barn door after the horse has been stolen. So it's kind of like maybe a Mormon would say, well, that's like you're barking up the wrong tree. That's like trying to pop popcorn on the apricot tree. No.
Okay, I got to tell you. Actually, Shelley, what does it mean?
So popcorn popping on the apricot tree is a song that you learn in primary, and there's like hand signals and shit that you get do with it too. And this also reminds me of I've talked before about our super serious primary leader that would get mad if the kids got too excited about the songs they were singing, and so the primary class was always in trouble singing popcorn popping on the apricot tree. Should we
they were
sing
too
it for her, Bryce?
They were too
Oh yeah,
exuberant.
at least the first two lines, right?
I'm going to
right.
get my are you doing the hand signals, Bryce? I'll know if you're
Oh,
not.
totally. Are you kidding me? I got my binoculars up. I'm ready to go.
Me too. All right, 1, 2, 3. I
looked
looked
out
the window and what did I see? Popcorn popping on the apricot tree. Spring had... Come on, Bryce. Spring has
Such
brought
a
us
nice
a surprise. Popcorn
Blossoms
popping right before my
eyes.
I'm going to keep going. I can take an
take an
armful and make a treat. A popcorn bar that would smell so sweet.
This is so
It
stupid.
wasn't really so,
but it seemed to me popcorn popping on the apricot tree.
What is wrong with Mormons? This is the stupidest song I've ever heard.
You know that all of your listeners are like making the hand signals right
Oh,
now.
totally. Exactly.
Who thought of what kind of drugs was somebody doing To think about popcorn on an apricot
So
tree.
we're dropping
That's not a
coffee, but we're
thing.
picking up LSD. So
That's not a
paper about that.
thing. Okay.
Actually, it was kind of a trick fun pod because doesn't mean shit. It does.
it's true.
No meaning to it. It was
wonder-
a hymn or like a children's primary song from like the 1950s or something.
Yeah.
Somebody just made up.
Yeah,
So
because
it doesn't actually
it was-
mean anything.
All right, it was probably springtime. They were doing some drugs. They looked out at the blossoms on the apricot tree and they thought, wow, that kind of looks like popcorn.
They're like, hey, Hiram, let's write a song.
Let's do it.
Wow, I want to know the origination of that song because that is some crazy crap right there.
When you were in primary, Bryce, did your primary leaders, I don't know if you remember or not, but did they ever try to change the words to mean something else? I remember for some reason they always wanted to redo the words into something that, I don't know, whatever. That's a tangent. I just thought of it.
Don't remember that ever.
Okay.
Wow, thanks for that foom pod, Bryce.
Absolutely. And well, thank you both for joining us on the show today. Where can people find a Latter-day Lesbian?
Oh, well, we are available on your favorite podcast app. Just look for Latter Day Lesbian. You don't even need the podcast part if you're on the podcast app.
It's true.
You just plug it in.
We also have a
Come right
Facebook
back.
page that's lots of fun. Latter Day Les, or it's Latter Day Lesbian Podcast. I don't know.
Facebook
We're easy to
at
find.
Latter Day Les.
At Latter Day Les.
But we also have a website, latterdaylesbian.org.
Awesome. And a Patreon page as well?
Absolutely.
We do.
Patreon.com/Latter-day Lesbian. And on there, we like to go and listen to previous podcasts and then video ourselves talking about that old podcast. It's a lot of laughter,
Ooh.
lots of drinking. The dogs jump up in our laps. It's just a big fun mess. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff. Good times.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to keep up every week when episodes come out. I haven't listened to episode 36 yet, but that's on my docket for this evening. But once again, Mary, Shelley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thank
Bryce.
you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Once again, a huge thanks to Mary and Shelley for joining us. And be sure to check the show notes to find a link to Latter-day Lesbian Podcast. Or, search for it on your favorite podcasting app of choice. And honestly, check out their show. It's fantastic. It's honestly, I said it in the segment. You heard me say it. It's my new favorite weekly show that I've acquired into my weekly rotation. It's a great show. So let's close it out. This episode is coming to you a day early because Sunstone is coming up. Sunstone is this week. As you're listening to this, I am probably driving down to Salt Lake City for the big Sunstone. This is going on July 31st to August 3rd at the Mountain America Expo Center. Check sunstonemagazine.com. You can still buy tickets at the door if you want to attend any of the days. You can buy one-day tickets. You can buy tickets for the entire conference. I'm going to be there the whole time. I'm going to be hanging out with everybody. And if you listen to the Glassbox podcast, you will also have found out that Ryan McKnight is going to be there and hosting a get-together, a hangout at the Wave on Thursday night. On Friday night, we are doing a meetup at Club 90. Check the Naked Mormonism Facebook page. This is for August 2nd, Friday of Sunstone. This is the Sunstone after party. We're going to go to a club that's about 5 blocks away from the Mountain America Expo Center. Bring your appetites, bring a valid ID, and come and hang out and have drinks. Go, there'll be a live band there, or we can go up to a quieter area upstairs of the club and hang out there if we're, wanting to talk. We're going to just let everybody know the owner of Club 90 actually got in touch with me and said that because this is the first time we're doing an event there, they were going to waive the entry fee. So there's no entry fee, just to have to bring a valid ID. It is 21 and over, just to let everybody know. But Club 90, check the Naked Mormonism Facebook page or go to club90.com. That's going to be, once again, Friday, August 2nd. We're going to begin it at 8:30 p.m. Give everybody a chance if you want to get dinner before going over to Club 90, or if you just want to hang out there at Sunstone with some other people, and then just come over to Club 90 and hang out with us. It'll be awesome. We don't have any new patrons to thank over at patreon.com/nakedmormonism because I'm recording this ahead of schedule. But next week, we're taking a break from the historical timeline. Next week, we're going to have an interview with Jana Reese and Benjamin Knoll about Jana Reese's new book, The Next Mormons. The interview is really fantastic. It's a little bit longer than my regular interviews go, which, if you listen to my interviews in the past, It's the full episode that patrons are going to get. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. Regular listeners are going to get a slightly cut down version of that. So if you want to listen to the full uncut version of the interview, be sure to sign up at patreon.com/nakedmormonism, where you also get a ton of extra content, an extra weekly episode, extended editions of every new episode, and just, it's worth it. It's worth it joining the NAMO ranks, the Outer Darkness ranks. And, you're supporting a content creator who hopefully, if you've listened through all of the episode and you're listening still, you're enjoying this content. If you can't support at patreon.com/nakedmormonism, it also helps out a ton if you leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting app of choice, especially iTunes. That really helps with visibility. But if you can't do any of those things, you still hit the download button. You still listen to the end of the episode. And for that, I want to thank you so much for lending me your ear. Hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast. This podcast is produced with the help of Julie Briscoe as social media manager, Brian Ziegenhagen as audio engineer, and Andrew Torres of the law offices of P. Andrew Torres in the Opening Arguments podcast as legal counsel. Music is written and performed by Jason Camo of aloststateofmind.com and used with permission. Naked Mormonism is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2019, all rights reserved.